All
We are
right.
live.
Okay, so welcome to our presentation on increasing adult walking, which was a replication study for applied behavioral analysis. And we have 5 presenters today: Carolyn Bowman, Abigail Kronk, Jamie Irvin, Carly McKay, and myself, Carrie Rogers. And we're going to start first by doing an introduction of each of our group members. Go ahead, Jamie.
Hello, I'm Carolyn, and this is my 3rd semester at Ball State University, and I currently live in Indianapolis, Indiana.
I'm Abigail. I currently live in Anderson, Indiana. My undergrad is from Ball State as well, and this is my 3rd semester of the ABA master degree through Ball State. I've been working in the field of people with special needs for about 9 years, and I currently work in an ABA clinic with children with autism in the Indianapolis area.
I'm Jamie Irvin. I live in the Tampa Bay area. I was an ESE teacher for about 7 years, and then took some classes through FIT and became a BCABA in 2013. And I currently work with adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the group home and ADT setting.
Hi, Carly McKay. I live in Argus, Indiana. This is my 2nd semester through Ball State. I recently graduated from Hanover College with a degree in psychology. And so this is my 1st year working in the field of ABA, and I'm hoping to continue on.
All right, my name is Carrie Rogers. As I started out, I am a doctoral teaching fellow and PhD candidate in the Department of Educational Studies, specifically focusing on curriculum. My background is in working with students from diverse backgrounds, including those with special needs, and I'm completing a certificate in autism in addition to my other degrees here at Ball State. All right. Is that everybody?
I'm just going to interrupt you guys really quick. It's helpful if everybody turns their mics on mute when you're not talking to reduce some of the feedback.
Okay. Okay, so our original study was by Curdy and Gallery, and that study was specifically an internet-based contingency management to increase walking in sedentary adults, specifically over 50 years old. And the purpose of our study as we were looking at this is that it's common knowledge that, Americans are not walking or engaging in physical activity to the extent that they really need to be. And the Center for Disease Control has recommended that adults engage in at least 150 minutes of physical activity weekly. Now, that does not have to be all at once, nor does it have to be what we're used to hearing 3 times. We're looking at even increments of 10 minutes is very helpful. However, the majority of Americans are not engaging in even 10-minute increments. We're also noticing an increase in obesity rates. And while the previous study that we used was looking at internet interventions to increase walking with adults over 50, when we replicated it, obviously we're doing it with a slightly different population. And we'll go into that in a little bit. In detail. Now, if we look at some of the materials that we used, every participant within the study, which was each of the 5 of us, needed a mobile device. So, for example, a smartphone. We agreed on a smartphone because not everybody had a Fitbit, which was what the original study used. We decided on using Step Up Pedometer as our app because it could be downloaded from both the Apple App Store and from the Google Play Store. We also had Snapchat, which did a screenshot with a timestamp to do monitoring treatment fidelity, and we'll discuss that a little more later. And then the obvious ones, having supportive shoes and appropriate attire. And so if we go into defining the definition of walking, it's something we take for granted because we do it every single day, right? But when we're looking at implementing a study and we're looking at replicating, we have to come up with an objective definition of this behavior. And so for us, the behavioral definition of walking, which we created, was bipedal movement in one direction in which the participant takes repeated alternating steps between the left and the right foot. Okay, so stepping forward, left, right, left, right. And this was measured using the Step Up Pedometer application on each participant's mobile device. in other words, a smartphone. Now, the thing is, while we're walking every day, whether that's getting up out of bed and walking into the kitchen or climbing a flight of stairs, we were not able to count it. So it was excluded if it wasn't counted within the step-up odometer application. Now, it is important to note that the step-up odometer application was running in the background of all of the phones at all times. So when the phone was working, it should have been recording. And we'll go into a little bit more detail of some of the challenges with that later on in the presentation, but that gives you an idea as you're looking at the data for when the behavior was not possibly measured. Okay.
Next, I'll discuss our data collection. Like Carrie touched on in the original study, each participant wore a Fitbit to track their steps. And the time for that was during the walking time to bed. And then in our replication of the study, we used the step-up pedometer application, which monitored each step that we took each day, and we started tracking at 12 a.m. until the next day at 11:59 p.m.
Okay, and I'll review baseline. In the original study, there were 11 participants. The step-up goals, or excuse me, we use step-up. The step goals were assessed over 5-day blocks, and the participants needed to exceed the goal on at least 3 of the 5 days to advance to a high. Oops, I'm looking at the intervention. Oh my gosh. There was a screening period instead of a baseline period. They considered it a screening period during the baseline. And they were provided, each individual was provided $5 for submitting a nightly video of steps to the website. They use this Motivate website as well as their Fitbit. And then the intervention participants chosen were based on their average daily step count of being less than 6,000. So in our replication, we had 5 participants. We used the step-up pedometer on our mobile devices. We tracked steps in the natural environments with no contingencies in place. So as they were getting $5 for submitting and things like that, we were just carrying our phones. The 7-day baseline, we chose to do a 7-day baseline to ensure that enough data was collected. And then the intervention participants were chosen based on the average step count, the 3 individuals who had the lowest average step count, and the variability of the data. Now we have intervention.
So going into the intervention of the original study, they had 11 participants again, and so their step goals were assessed over 5-day blocks. And they needed to exceed their goal at least 3 of the 5 days to increase to a higher goal. In the original study, new goals were determined by either adding 1,000 steps to their average that was made in baseline, or they had to exceed the 4th highest step count from the previous block. So they did the 4th highest step count as a way to ensure that if there were participants that were like greatly increasing their steps, that they could continue and not just get limited by adding 1,000 steps. So then if a participant did not reach their step goal during that block, the goal just rolled over to the next block, and they were on that goal until they reached it. So in our study, so we changed our blocks to 7 days instead of the 5, just to ensure we had enough data. And we also kept that they needed to exceed the goal at least 3 days out of the 7. And then instead of having the 4th highest one as a way to increase our goal, we decided to only add 1,000 steps to our goal. And then if our goal was not met during the 7 days, it rolled over to the next block as well, like it did in the original study. So now moving on to reinforcement, our reinforcement had to change when we replicated it, because in the original study they were paid, and none of us have tons of money, so we couldn't pay each other to reinforce us. So in the original study, participants received money for reaching their step goals at the end of each block. So for instance, if their step goal was in the range of 2,000 to 2,999 steps, they reached they got $2 for reaching that goal, and so on. And they also got a $3 bonus for meeting their goal. So they could potentially get like $10 if their goal was in the 7,000 range. During our study, since we couldn't use money, we decided to use scratch-off tickets because for the 3 in the reinforcement group, we found these reinforcing. So the tickets were determined to be reinforcing for all of us, like I said, and a scratch-off ticket was given each time the goal is met at least 3 times during the 7 days. And each participant in the reinforcement group was responsible for getting their own scratch-off ticket. And now we'll be moving on to the inter-observer agreement.
Go ahead, Abby. You'll need to unmute your mic.
Sorry about that. Okay. So for the inter-observer agreement, we were told to come up with a creative way of doing this because the original study didn't have a way for other observers to come and observe each other. They were uploading their videos each night and getting their reinforcement for that, but there wasn't anything really discussed about how they were observing each other, like 2 presenters or 2 observers observing somebody else walking. So we decided that since we live in different areas of the nation and different areas of the state, that we could not go and see each other walking and then count how many steps to match up to these step-up pedometers. So what we did, we were told to come up with a creative way to create an IOA. So what we came up with was that both members of the control group, which were Carrie and Caroline, would independently calculate the average of the reinforcement group, which was Carly, Jamie, and Abigail, myself, steps taken in baseline, and adding 1,000 steps to determine the first goal in the intervention. The control group repeated the same process using the formula to determine the second week's goal and then the third week's goal. So the reinforcement group calculated, so the formula was the average of days 1 through 7 and then adding 1,000 to get the intervention goal. And then this way we wanted to see if each participant came up with what each participant should have gotten in their range of steps for their own goals. And then the reinforcement group, there were 2 people in the reinforcement group who calculated the IOA for the control group as well, so that we had the reverse. So then the first observer was, is that right? Yes, okay. So the first observer was Carly in the reinforcement group, and she determined the IOA for both Caroline and Carrie and got these figures. So the baseline was 49.25 for Caroline and 79.45 for Carrie. Then for week 2 for Caroline, it was 50.66. And then for Carrie, it was 34.55. And then for week 3, it would have been 70.35 for Caroline and 30.44 for Carrie. And then I was the second observer, and I got the same values that Carly got. So our inter-agreement was 100%. Then the control group did the same and observed the reinforcement groups. So therefore, Carrie observed Abby, Carly, and Jamie and got the figures for the baseline week 1 and week 2. So Abby at 50.39 for week 1, Carly for 23.92 for baseline, and Jamie at 24.16 for baseline. Then when intervention started in week 2, Carrie got 40.56 for Abby, 43.74 for Carly, and 42.22 for Jamie. And then for the week 3, which would be the second week of intervention, Carrie got 2791 for Abby, 4702 for Carly, and 4002 for Jamie. And again, the figures were the same that Caroline observed for the 3 people in the reinforcement group getting 100% inter-observer agreement. Then in the treatment fidelity, it was the responsibility of each person in the group to submit the screenshot of their weekly data via our group text message that we all use on our smartphone for each block or each week. And then group 1, as discussed earlier, were to reinforce themselves with a $1 scratch-off ticket when they reached their goal for 3 days out of the 7-day block. And then except for block 3, when they would not be reinforcing themselves due to reversing back to baseline. And we're currently in our 3rd block right now. So at the end of this week, it will be the third block where we go back to baseline. And then this was measured by the reinforcement being sent was measured by sending a photo of the scratch-off ticket to each group via the group text message and the Snapchat application the day that it was received, so that everybody in the group knew who was getting it and when.
Okay. As you can see, whoa. Oh. As you can see, with my results, I was pretty, I started out pretty low during baseline, and my data wasn't too variable. It was pretty stable, just around the 2,000 step range, a little bit higher. So then I set my goal, which is the horizontal line. Starting out with the first week or the first day of lotto tickets, I was very excited about getting my lottery ticket, so I stepped a lot. But then I kind of fell off course there. With that first stepping day being very high, it upped my average for that block. So as you can see, I did meet at least my goal for more than 3 of the days. So I was able to up my goal. And I met it again for 3 days. So I was able to adjust to the changing criterion. But the range is pretty high. I mean, I have like a 7,000 step range from day to day. But it does appear that the lottery ticket has been effective thus far. We'll see what this week's data brings us. Next.
Okay, and now it's up to my results. And so as you can see in the baseline, my steps were pretty variable until the end when they started to stable out. So then I was able to come up with my goal. And then during the first week of the lotto ticket, my steps were pretty variable. I did not reach my goal, so I had to stay with the same goal for the following week. So then moving into the next week, I stayed about the same. I just couldn't reach my goal with what I was doing. And as you can see, my data was never very stable throughout it.
I think we lost Abby.
We can just wait a second until she pops back on.
Okay. Um, do we want to go forward and then come back?
That's fine with me.
Okay. Let's see. Are you still doing control, Caroline?
I'm not, but I can try to bring up the PowerPoint.
Okay, if not, I will go into it and I can do it. Okay.
Okay.
Excellent.
Looks like Abby's back now.
Oh, excellent. Go ahead, Abby.
Sorry about that.
Can you go into present mode, please?
Okay. My computer kicked me out.
It happens. No worries. Go ahead and go back to yours.
Okay. All right. So, are you ready for me? Sorry.
Yes.
I was talking and then I saw that I wasn't there anymore. Okay. So I was part of the reinforcement group who was able to reinforce themselves with a lotto ticket when the goal was met. In my baseline, my data is pretty high, it's pretty stable. And so I got my goal of 5,000. So then to add the 1,000 for the first goal in intervention, I moved it up to 6,000. And as you can see, like I didn't meet that very often. I only met it one day. So I was not able to reinforce myself that week. And so I as well kept my goal the same for the second week, which again, my goal was 6,000. And then I didn't meet my goal at all either in what I was doing. I know that there were times that that I might have left my phone or was unable to carry it, so therefore I wasn't able to meet my goal as well.
All right, so go back up, please. One more.
Sorry.
No worries. Okay, so on mine, it's interesting because my baseline was so high. I mean, there was a day that I hit almost 15,000, and when I'm looking at the data, those were the days that I was running a camp, and so I was running around from different parts of campus and the buildings, etc. Once we got to treatment, while my goal was about 8,900, I clearly dropped down in both weeks of treatment. Now, it's interesting, and I'll go into this a little more in the limitations, is on my study, you will see that there's 2 days with absolutely no data, and there's 2 days with very little data, which that brings up some questions with our methods of measurement, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Okay, for my results, baseline I was pretty steady. I mean, I ranged a little bit, but for the most part I was increasing my steps each day. And that made my goal 8,000 steps for treatment week 1. And 1. I only met my goal 2 of the days instead of 3. So I unfortunately had to keep mine at 8,000 for week 3. And you can see as well, although my steps were increasing each week overall, I didn't meet my goal as well during week 2.
Okay, so we have our results chart. So let's see, in the reinforcement group, Abigail was definitely had the highest baseline average. And it looks as though Carly and I both increased during our week 2. And then during week 3, Carly was the only one that increased a little bit. Our daily average was between 3,500 and almost 4,000 across all of the different weeks. And then the range, we had various ranges. Mine was the shortest range from averages from week to week. And then if we look at the control group, Carrie was pretty high up there, that first block, that baseline block. And Caroline was at just about 5,000. She continued to increase and Carrie went down, but that she had explained that. And their data was a little bit variable there, even not gaining the reinforcement. Oh, I'm sorry, Caroline continued to increase, as she said. So there's our results overall. And then I think we'll go into discussion.
So if we look at some of the conclusions that we were able to draw based on the previous chart, the reinforcement group did show an overall increase in number of steps per day over the course of the study. The reinforcement group showed that increase. However, the control group did not. And so it could be that the reinforcement that we used, which was the scratch-off lotto ticket, could have been a potentially actually a very good reinforcer. Now, what's interesting is the range taken for each day was smaller for the reinforcement group than the control group. And so it's interesting to be looking at, yes, we have the reinforcement group, they've increased their number of steps, and the control group really did not, but the range is also much tighter for that reinforcement group. So that kind of brings the question, why is it tighter for this reinforcement group rather than the control group? And this kind of brings to mind some of the limitations to the study that I think we really need to consider. So if we look at the protocol that we had, it was not universally followed throughout the study. And that's not through any fault of the participants. There are times when the phone could not be carried. For example, one member was in a courtroom and they were not allowed to have the phone on their person. And that's just because of a job requirement. Another person was in a training that could not carry the phone. And so you have these times where the phone was not able to be carried. Another problem that we ran up against is that the accuracy of the measurement using the step-up pedometer application was really brought into question. And this came with, especially when I looked at my own data, because with the data, the days that I had nothing showing up on step-up pedometer, and there are 2 days that it actually showed up as 0. But for one day I had over 2 3/4 miles, and on another day I had over 4.5 miles that I walked. And the step-up pedometer application runs in the background of your phone. And so it's a problem with this application. Is it not accurate within what it's doing? And so that's something that we need to be questioning. Potentially, should we have been using 2 different applications to get a true reading and maybe taking the average of those? The other thing that we really needed to think about limitation-wise for the study is we were unable to determine what the actual reinforcer was for each participant. Was it the scratch off lottery ticket? Was it the actual, I downloaded this pedometer to my phone? Or was it that we had group accountability, that sending the picture, the screenshot to each person within our group and checking in with each other? Hey, are you walking? And so that's something to really consider. Did this reinforcer have, which was the reinforcer, and did that reinforcer have the effect? And that also brings us when we're looking at future research and the directions that you could maybe go with looking at this study. Because when we're looking at changing behavior, obviously we want to be using reinforcement as much as possible. And so what are some actual potential reinforcers for adults? And this, when we're looking at them, you know, as we talked in the beginning, that there are rising obesity rates for the American population of adults and children overall. We do not also have the level of physical activity that we need during a day or during a week. So how are we going to increase this? How are we going to ward off obesity? And so we need to determine what are some of these potential reinforcers. Are reinforcers, things like lottery tickets, are those a good reinforcer? And so one of the ways that maybe looking at future research, maybe doing some large scale surveys, looking at using a reinforcer preference assessment, basically modifying it from what Cooper et al. Did with children in an ABA clinic. Another thing to also be looking at is the relationship between the requirements of a job living situation and the amount of walking or other physical activity that a person did during a day. And again, as I'm looking at my own data, and that's one of the beautiful aspects of a single subject design. While there were 5 subjects in this study, each of us was a single subject design, and we were looking at changing the criterion based on our own level of walking the previous week. And so, but as we're looking at this, and many of us have jobs that require walking during some points and not walking at other points. And so if there is a situation where we have a job where the person is sitting for 9 and 10 hours a day, how can we implement physical activity throughout that workday to make it actually integrated, so it's not this additional task that an adult has to do in their already busy life? And so as we're looking at then, trying to modify the behavior, once we can determine the relationship between what that adult's daily lived experience is and the reinforcers that actually work for adults. And insurance companies would be interested in this as well, as they're looking at reducing insurance rates and making health care more accessible. They want to improve the adult and modify the behavior so that adults are more physically active. And so as we're continuing to go forward, if we look at, the actual studies themselves, which goes back to Curdy and Dallery, while they're using only 12 participants that were sedentary adults over the age of 50, and we only used 5 females between the ages of 25 and 36, it does really bring light to the fact that behavior can be modified and that future research needs to be done. And we'll take your questions at this point.
All right, great job, you guys. I really enjoyed your presentation. I really liked that during the methods you lined up both the methods of the existing study and the methods of your study. That just really helped kind of conceptualize the differences that you guys made and how you made it unique to your own study. You also did a really good job discussing limitations and did a good job discussing the implications of your findings. I especially like that you talked about the role of reinforcement, because as you guys watch some of the other presentations of similar studies, you'll hear that that's a question I ask a lot, that it's hard in these types of studies to identify what the reinforcer is when there's so many variables. I mean, for myself, like just self-monitoring enough, having a Fitbit or step count and seeing my progress kind of move up is motivating enough, but for other people, maybe not so much. So I like that you guys hit on that. Just out of curiosity, did any of you guys in the experimental group who got a scratch-off ticket, did you actually win anything from it?
I won $1
Okay.
on my $1 scratch off, but it was the thrill. It was the thrill.
Okay. Because yeah, that that was another thing that I was thinking, that like I don't know how reinforcing that would be, especially if you never actually come in contact with the reinforcement. But as you say, perhaps it was the thrill of getting the scratch off ticket. Anybody else? Did anybody else win anything? No. Okay. I also just wanted to know what you guys thought about the fact that the original study recommended that if the person didn't meet their goal, that they just keep the goal the same during the next treatment phase. I know that that was like a part of their study that you replicated, but I think just kind of like, I'm thinking of what would this look like in a clinical setting, or even not in like a personal, if I was implementing an intervention on myself and I saw, I'm not making any progress, like, would I keep things the same, or would I implement some type of change? Same thing with like an intervention, with a child, like they're not making any changes as a result of this intervention. They're not meeting their goal. Does that mean we need to, possibly change the reinforcer, change components of the intervention, or maybe decrease our goal a bit? So I guess I was just wondering if you guys had thought of that and what your response was to that.
I definitely see your point, and I think we should have like stepped it down. Like if we can't reach it, we don't want to like set ourselves up for failure. You see that a lot. Like I do that a lot in my job. If a kid's not meeting it, we will, move things down because we want them to succeed. We don't want them to feel like they can't do anything. And I think for the study, I think it was okay because to me, like it would push me farther, like to try, I got to reach it. But that's not always the case with the kids we work with. And for this assignment, we replicated the study, so we just kept it as it was.
I completely agree with what Carly was saying. It's also something that we learn in this field, and if you haven't already, I think it's something that some of us will learn along the way. But it's like Carly said, like giving them a taste of reinforcement. Like if I don't know what I'm working for, or if I see like, hey, I really want that. Like, for example, I have a girl I work with and she works for popcorn. Her DRO is for popcorn. And she's like, I really want that popcorn. But she, her goal is so high that she can't meet it. So we actually recently had to down that from like 45 seconds to 35 seconds without the behavior. And so I do think that it probably would have been a good idea for the original study to maybe bring it down a little bit, even if it was just for like a couple of days, to be like, okay, like for a couple of days, we're going to take this down, maybe like 500 steps, maybe not a full 1,000, kind of see where we go from there and then work with it up there. Cause like, I know like with ABA, a lot of it is trial and error. You're not always going to get what you're expecting of it. And it is really hard to know like what the reinforcer is and how to do that. So I think that that is something that could be considered again for maybe for future like for future research. So like maybe in the future, maybe looking at how to help those people who aren't reaching their goal, maybe by downing it or making it more reinforcing.
Good. The only other question that I had, and I know that you alluded to this a little bit, as a limitation, possible future change of having a secondary data collection system. I was just curious if any of you did happen to have like wearing a Fitbit or an iWatch that was taking data at the same time as your app was.
I was, and so I would try and remember to carry my in my back pocket of my jeans the whole time, every day. Like I would consistently, like I found myself always reaching for my phone to like put it in my pocket. And I always wear a Fitbit, and I would hit like 10,000 steps a day with my Fitbit. And as you can see with the application that we use, I never got 1,000 steps. So I don't know if if where my phone was like placed on my body, it wasn't like moving enough for it to track it, because the Fitbit's on my wrist, so like my arm movement will track it. So yeah, there definitely was like an accuracy problem. So just comparing the two, like the application we used was not nearly as accurate.
Going off on what she's saying, you know, as I said previously, you know, I don't have a Fitbit, so I was using my phone and this application, but I have a pedometer embedded in my Apple phone. And so those numbers, while I don't see steps, I saw mileage. And the mileage was very different on the two. And so, you know, if I were doing, you know, you asked a question about clinical research study, I think that the researchers really need to pilot it ahead of time before they go out for the big NSF grant or an APA grant beforehand, because otherwise you could be doing this study with this instrument. Our instrument could be flawed. Mm-hmm. And that's something that, you know, you don't really think about when you're downloading something from an app store, because clearly it's been tested, right?
Yeah, I feel like you guys have some feedback to give the app that you downloaded. So, all right. Well, I don't think I have any other questions. You guys did a really great job. So it'll be good to go from here.
All right.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
So much.
Okay, have a good night. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.